So during this first part of fitting mastery, we're going to be talking about the fitting fundamentals. Like I said, the why of everything that's going on in terms of why your clothes aren't translating into perfectly fitting garments that you're wearing. So that means talking about measuring properly, and then going on to understand what standard sizing really means and how to choose the best starting size for you to then adjust it, test it, and translate that into the perfect fit for you. Okay, so we need to start by talking about sizing. Now, I want to say something but maybe a little bit confusing, and that is there is no standard size. Let me share with you what that means with me as an example. So, for example, I could say I am a standard size 8. But if I was to go shopping back in the day and I would first of all walk into Topshop, I would try on something size 8, would fit me pretty well, probably be a little bit short because I'm tall and lanky, but it would fit me pretty well. But then I'd go into H&M, I'd try on something size 8 and I would be squashed into that size 8. It was too small, I'd normally have to go up a size. Now I go into Marks and Spencer's and I find I try on a size 8 again and it's too big for me, so I go down a couple sizes. So same size, but all very different fits. Now let's fly halfway around the world and go to Japan. This is a true story by the way. I walk into the night store, I try on a size 8 and everything is too short for me. Why is everything such different sizing even though I'm trying on the same size? So here's the thing, there can be cultural differences. So when I'm in the UK, I'm obviously in the Western world and sizing is more catered to my body shape. But then when I'm going to Japan, it's more catered to obviously the Japanese clientele. And that generally means they're shorter than me, so then we have that cultural difference. Nike aren't going to use the same sizing all around the world because they want things to fit them in the different areas they're aiming at to make sure their sales and people want to buy them. So they're going to adjust the fit even though it's the same size to work for different clientele around the world. Then we go to different brandings clientele and their ideal client they're aiming at. So you think of the H&Ms of the world. The ideal client they tend to be aiming at is more like the younger market, the teenagers, the people in the 20s. Then you go to Topshop, it's more like 20s, a little bit older. Then you go to the M&S and it's slightly older again. And that means they are then wanting people to feel good in their sizing. So they are creating clothes that work for that kind of clientele and adjusting their sizing to work for that. This is why a size 8 in one store is very different to a size 8 in another store. And you might be thinking, why is that relevant to when I'm using shop-bought sewing patterns? Because the same is true for shop-bought sewing pattern companies. It matters what kind of clientele they are aiming at. If they're aiming at a very young audience, generally the sizing will be smaller. If they're aiming at an older audience, generally the standard sizing will be bigger. And this again differs brand to brand. It might not be the case because the other thing that goes into standard sizing is the amount of ease that each company is adding in as well. So you might find that one company has a very fitted look all the time, so they're adding very little ease into their patterns. And by the way, ease means space. Think of ease as space. We are adding in extra space to move in our clothes. Think of it like that. So then you might have another company who loves the oversized look, so they're always adding a lot of ease into their garments. But maybe when you're wearing those things, you don't want them to look as oversized, so you're going down a size. So you can understand, as I'm talking through this, you might be like, oh my God, this sounds so confusing. And this is the thing, there is no standard sizing. So the thing you really want to consider when you are choosing the size that works for you is your measurements and the fit and comfort. Now, one other thing when it comes to standard sizing is there are some standards to it. You can tell there are some standards to it because you generally have like, I'm always about this kind of size, but there's those nuances, which is why there isn't really a standard sizing. But there is one other thing that really plays a part when it comes to women's wear standard sizing, and that is the bust cup of the clothing it is created for. So generally, and again, this is going to differ brand to brand, the clothing we are trying on, or the patterns we're using, or the blocks we're using, they are generally made for a B or a C cup. So if you're not a B or a C cup, you're going to find you have to compromise. So that means if you're a larger cup size, you're probably going to go up a few sizes, or up a size, up depending on what your cup size, you're definitely going to go up in your sizings to compensate for your bust. So this is why doing full bust adjustments and small bust adjustments, if you're not on a B or a C cup, is pretty much essential. However, like I said before, if you're going to different brands and actually they're catering to the ideal client being a lady who has a larger bust, then maybe you don't need to worry about this. So then you're not compensating for your bust size. Actually, you're choosing your true size, or true size. You know what we're saying right now. Now, there's one other thing I want to talk about when it comes to sizing, and that is shape. So we've talked about the fact there are various different factors that go into the sizing of clothing, and a lot of companies try and be size inclusive, which is incredible. But here's the thing, they're size inclusive, but there's a difference between size inclusive and shape inclusive. They're not necessarily being shape inclusive. And fair play, it is hard to cater clothes and sewing patterns to everybody's different sizes and shapes, because there are billions of different sizes and shapes. There is no true standard size and shape. Everyone is different. So when they are creating size inclusive patterns or clothes, they are generally catered to the hourglass shape. So they are not shape inclusive. And what I want to be in my world is shape inclusive, because everyone has not only a different size, but a different shape as well. Like, I know I don't have the standard hourglass figure. No fit models really have that standard hourglass figure a lot of the time either. Even fit models struggle to fit into the standard sizing. So when you're considering buying clothes in a store or buying shop bought sewing patterns, then consider that ideal client that company is aiming at. Is that similar to you? If so, then you're more likely to fit their standard sizing. And the main thing is comfort. Ignore the numbers, forget the numbers. The numbers don't mean anything. Size 8, size F, 29, 37, doesn't matter what we call them. The thing that matters is the comfort. So because of all this, we really want to know our measurements. Measurements are king. And that leads me on to the second piece we are going to be talking about in this part 1 of fitting mastery. To really take measurements that translate into the perfect fit, I have 7 tips for you today, which is going to share with you why your measurements aren't translating right now, and then how to get them to translate into the perfect fit. Now, the first couple tips are pretty obvious, but they need to be said because it's in these times where mistakes happen. So the first thing is either use centimeters or inches, don't use both. When we use both, we tend to just mix and match and then everything gets all confusing. So pick one or the other. Doesn't matter whether you're using inches or centimeters, doesn't matter, just pick one or the other. The second tip, which is pretty obvious again, is to measure 3 times. When you measure 3 times, you notice your mistake is really obvious because it's going to stand out a lot more. If you're finding those 3 measurements aren't the same, you want to go back and think, okay, what's going wrong? Which one doesn't look right? Okay, now I've nailed it. So measure 3 times. 2 pretty obvious things, but this is where the mistakes can really quickly and really easily happen. Now, the second thing that happens is we get out our tape measure and then we're like, okay, I want to measure my waist. And then we're like, oh, okay, so I want to be, wouldn't it be great if I was like a 62 centimeter waist or a whatever it is in inches, 27, 25 inch waist or whatever it is. So we pull this as tight as possible, but we want to think about comfort. Comfort, comfort, comfort. That's the main thing, right? So rather than looking at the numbers, think, is this comfy for me? I'm gonna have to wear an item of clothing that is this tight. Is this comfy for me? Am I pulling the tape measure so tight so that I can get to a certain number? Or am I pulling the tape measure and putting it around me so that I can feel comfy in my clothes? And this leads me on to the second part of it. we want to consider not only what I call static measurements, but also dynamic when we're moving, those kind of measurements. So let me put this into practice right now. So right now I'm measuring my waist when I'm sitting down, right? Normally we'd only measure it standing up. So we're going to be different when we're standing to sitting, but I want to sit in my dress as well as stand in it. I want to sit in my pair of trousers as well as stand in it. So when I'm measuring, what I do is I check my measurement is going to work both for when I'm standing and for when I'm sitting, so that it's comfy on me no matter what. Because I don't want to put my pair of trousers on and be like, oh, it was great when I was standing, I was so comfy. But then I'm sat down and I'm like, oh my God, it's digging in so much, it's too painful. I don't want that to be the case. So test your measurements, not only in those static kind of positions, but also in those dynamic positions when you're moving around. Let me use another example for you. Maybe it's around your elbow you're measuring because you're wanting to create a shirt and you want to know how big to do the arm. So we could pull this as tight as possible, and then we'll be like, okay, cool, that's 24 centimeters. But then if I was to actually wear this garment and move my elbow, I couldn't wear a top that's 24 centimeters wide around there. So I want to consider, what is it going to be at that widest part when I'm moving? So consider not only those static positions, but those dynamic positions. Like, how are you going to move in this garment? Does that measurement reflect those movements? Now, tip number 5 is measuring in sections. And this is so key when it comes to your adjustments. So what do I mean by that? Okay, so if, for example, I was like, all right, my sleeve length is always too short. This is true story for me. My sleeve length, if I went to buy something in the store, generally tends to be too short. So when I'm creating my sewing patterns or my blocks, I want to increase the length of my sleeve length. But rather than me just measuring from here down to here and doing the overall length, what I want to do is break things down. I want to break things down into where my body bends. So my elbow, my wrist, here. I'm thinking like, where are those different sections where my body can move in a different way? And that then means when I'm then adjusting my pattern, I'm then thinking, do I want to adjust this top part here or this part here? Because if I find actually I've just taken the overall height, I might add into this bottom section here, but then I might have needed it in this top bit here, and I might find my elbow still isn't in the right place. But a pattern where it goes, you know, it's very fitted around the elbow, I maybe want that in a different place according to my fit. So I maybe wanted to have added a bit in here and a bit in here rather than just all of it in this bottom section. So break down your measurements and your patterns or your blocks into different segments. Think of it as where your body bends, where your body moves. So we're thinking, hey, hips to waist, waist to bust point, bust to top of here. We're thinking hips down to knees, knees down to ankles, not just waist to ankle. We're thinking breaking down those measurements so they truly reflect your proportions. Because you can have the same measurement from waist to ankle as someone else, but you can have very different proportions. You maybe have a long torso, so this bottom of the crotch to waist height would be super long on you, but someone else that might be super short, but then their legs are super long. So we want to break down those measurements because then that is going to help translate into the perfect fit. And by the way, I just want to add in right now, if you're thinking, how on earth am I going to remember all of this information? Don't worry, I have created a free ebook so that you can download it and you can just have it right next to you. As you're checking the fit of things, as you're going through the fitting process, you can just look at it and it's going to be no memory test. As always, I don't really like memory tests, not in my world. So you can download it using the link in the comments below. And then you can just have it on your iPad or you can print it out, whatever works for you, so you don't have to remember all this. Okay, let's go back to the tips. So tip number 6, your body will change in different life seasons. So let me use me as an example again. I had a baby a year ago, so that means my body shape will have changed a bit. So that means checking how it's changed. That also meant when I was in that postpartum kind of phase and also that pregnancy phase, honoring my different size and shape of my body, and I made different blocks to fit me at different stages. These actually here are breastfeeding size blocks, and I have blocks that I used before I was breastfeeding Arlo, before I was pregnant. I have different ones then, so I create different things for different seasons in my life. So let your size and shape evolve to work for you now. The thing that matters the most is the comfort, not the numbers on the tape measure, not the size number, but the comfort value. Now, my last tip, and this has to be my biggest tip, is that measurements alone are never enough to create the perfect fit. Often I get asked, how do I create blocks to my measurement? But I know that often this isn't the question I'm being asked. What I'm actually being asked is, how do I create blocks to represent my true size and shape and fit me perfectly? But here's the thing, measurements alone are never enough, because we all stand and move differently. So it goes back to that static versus dynamic. We want to honor dynamic movements. We want to honor the fact that maybe I have the same measurements as someone else, but my posture is very different and I move very differently. So I want to honor that in my clothing, in my blocks, in my sewing patterns. So that means testing the fit with twirls, and we're going to get into that in part 3. Even though I have told you there isn't really a standard size, we still need to have a starting size. We need to have a starting size if we're using shot-put sewing patterns. We need to have a starting size if we are getting blocks and then adjusting them to our size and shape. We need that starting point. So we still need to be able to choose a size that works for us. And I want you to choose a size that means minimal possible adjustments for your size and shape. So here are my tips to be able to choose a size that works best for you. The first thing is to remember that actually it doesn't matter whether you're using a different size on your bottom half as your top half. That is totally fine. So don't worry if you're finding on your bottom half you're a size 12, but on your top half you're a size 16. That's no problem at all. You can adjust the waist to fit your size and shape. And I'm going to be showing you in part 2 how to adjust the waist to your size and shape. So that's the first thing. Doesn't matter if you're different sizes, top and bottom. The second thing is that if you're a B or a C cup, like I said, most sewing patterns, most clothes, most blocks are created for a B or a C cup. So if that's the case, you can go down the normal route that we are advised to do, and that is choosing your size according to your bust size on the top section. So you can take your bust measurements and then choose your size from that. However, like I said, if you're not a B or a C cup, we don't want to be choosing our clothing and our patterns and our blocks based on our bust cup size, because it's not going to work. We are ruining every other sizing area in our clothing. So what I recommend doing instead is taking that back measurement at the bust height and comparing that to your sewing pattern or the measurements that you've got, which say this is for a body with this size, or comparing it against that block size. So taking that back measurement here. The reason for that is because this is going to represent pretty much your kind of shoulder size, your kind of like torso size round here, your arm length. It's going to represent you a lot more than if you have a D cup and then everything's just oversized. So you either want to take this measurement here or something that's really just not going to change much, like maybe this shoulder length here, maybe this back measurement, but not a waist measurement, not a bust measurement, not something that fluctuates a huge amount on different shaped bodies. Now, a quick tip when you're doing that is you want to ignore any design features, so any tucks, any gathers, all those kind of things that are adding extra measurements if you're needing to measure off a sewing pattern, because it doesn't have measurements on the sizing charts you've been given. So ignore any tucks, gathers, fold them up, have your pattern sew it as if that's all hidden away, and then measure from there. So that is the top half. Now let's talk the bottom half. To choose the best starting size for you, what I recommend doing is taking your hip measurement, not your waist measurement, because that can change, be very varied from person to person, but your hip measurement, because generally your hip measurement will then reflect how big you want it around your knees, how big you want it around your ankles. It'll generally reflect a lot more of the rest of your measurements. So then that'll mean less adjusting for you. So take that hip measurement. It's a lot easier to change the waist then change the hips, change the shape of the crotching, change all the other lengths and everything. Yes, you may need to do this, but we're trying to minimize those adjustments. So your starting point is your hip measurement when it comes to the bottom part of your clothing. Now, you're going to probably find your in-between sizes. So what do? Do you go up? Do you go down? I always recommend going up a size because it's a lot easier to make something smaller than make something bigger. So I recommend going up a size rather than down a size. So now we've really laid the foundations of the understanding behind why your clothes aren't translating into the perfect fit. Now what we need to be doing is making adjustments to perfect the fit. So that is what part 2 is going to be all about. And like I said, if you're like, how do I remember all those tips you shared today? You can download the free ebook that I have created. So you've got all those tips written out as you are going through the fitting process. And it also has links to all of the parts of this, so you don't have to hunt for them on YouTube. You can download the free ebook, which is going to be super, super helpful as you are perfecting the fit of your clothing. Thank you so much for joining me in part 1 of Fitting Mastery, and I'll see you in part 2 where we're going to be adjusting the fit of your clothes, including me sharing 3 tutorials with you with the 3 most common fit adjustments you need to know to create perfectly fitting clothes you just don't want to take off. They are so comfy to wear.